This program is brought to you by the Psychological Services of Dr. Nancy Mroczek.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Toward a Quality of Life, here in the month of September, the year 2003. Tonight we're going to talk about a couple of subjects, the usual subjects that come up because they are so compelling, they are so urgent, so necessary. The most urgent one for our own survival and true purpose and meaning and glory of being alive and ever knowing Earth at all, of course, is the environment, the most crucial one, but the one of most compassion and meaning and love and caring is for the animals that are in the laboratories, animals that are being used for testing, animals that are being experimented upon and used as objects for the gain, glory, and curiosity and exploration and so-called solution of human beings. Last time I talked to you, I was talking about toxins such as Roundup going into the soil, poisons going into the soil, other kinds of ingredients going into the soil. And I meant to mention about the soil itself, the fact that soil is alive itself, and that when we put ingredients such as toxins and phosphates into the ground, we disturb a natural balance of what is there organically. Creatures and other organisms that are in the soil, other balances of chemistry in the soil are getting disturbed as well. So we should keep this in mind when we're thinking about all the insults to the soil, and insults not only from toxins but things like phosphates that later lead to problems in our water as well, that our soil and our water is alive itself. Now, we also talk about air, of course, and there's so much to say about that. And recently I came across an article about asthma out of Los Angeles, an article that was written in reference to a conference that took place talking about the money that it is costing us as people in a country for respiratory problems due to problems of smog in the air. Now, it's been told by the EPA for quite some time to us that the air quality today is better than it was 20 years ago. And all you have to do is go on the highway in the hot summertime and look at the smog hanging in the air, sometimes obscuring visibility very close to wherever you may be driving, such that you can't see very far at all. All you have to do is spend a night out in a hot summer's evening, as were only a couple of evenings this summer, on certain days, to actually breathe and smell the air, particularly in cities, just coming into your lungs with every breath. All you have to do is keep your eyes open and your mind half alert to know that the air is very polluted. And here we have this conference, like many, about the problems with air, in fact, and how they're getting worse, not better. And here we have something from August of this year saying that millions of people are coming to the emergency department because of asthma and other respiratory problems. We're facing a public health epidemic because the number of people with asthma continues to rise. And this is a conference of physicians talking about this matter. Nationwide, childhood asthma rates have doubled in the last 2 decades, and the public health cost of pollution from cars and trucks is estimated to be 40 to 65 billion. Now, I don't really care about the money aspects of it. I care intrinsically about First of all, the fact that poor Mother Nature is getting so dirty and irreversibly harmed and ruined. Secondly, though we are the ones responsible, that we are suffering so, pragmatically speaking, from the effects of what's happening to our earth. And least of all, because it costs so much money to our economy, so to speak, for having these problems. But be that as it may, the article goes on to say that in Los Angeles, for example, nearly 2 million tons, or 57% of all smog-forming particulate matter and carbon monoxide pollutants comes from transportation. In Ventura, more than 150,000 tons, or 42% of pollutants, come from transportation. With new technology and new requirements, vehicles have gotten 90% cleaner over the last 3 decades, but the number of miles most people travel these days has increased. So there we have it. If you don't like the essential matter of the need for preserving the harmony, beauty, integrity, and justice of natural earth, then maybe you would be compelled by the health effects. Maybe you would be compelled by its antithesis to survival. Maybe you would be compelled on a third level by the cost, the whole cost-benefit analysis. That if it costs money, money being the measure, which it should not be the measure by which we measure all things, but it happens to be, that if it costs money that we could be saving otherwise, then and therefore it has to be bad. Now you also know that in so many areas there are floods, a lot of floods and a lot of unusual amounts of rain in short periods of time. And this and other kinds of crazy weather, wild winds, etc. And I wanted to bring up in reference to that, too, the fact that many nations are seeding clouds and making it rain. I know it was done when some events were going to be held in St. Petersburg, Russia, a while ago, that technicians were seeding the clouds, were seeding clouds in certain areas to take the rain away from the St. Petersburg area so that the weather would be very good during the time they wanted their events to happen. Now, when you start manipulating when and where it's going to rain, that's another way you're interfering with the natural progression and makeup of things, and of course that's going to add, in addition to so many other factors we sometimes discuss, to the calamities that end up being too much rain, too little rain, when you start manipulating with things that are way too big and way too beyond what you are capable of having under your own human management, are way beyond what is possible for humans to be managing. Now again, too, as concerns the environment, we see reports that many fish appear dead on the shores with increasing frequency. So take that as a message. Why would thousands of fish be washing up ashore dead? Very bad. And we need fish, and that our fish supply is dwindling, and that we're not going to have fish. And you can see the fish prices rising, and certain kinds of fish that used to be cheap now costing quite a bit of money. Again, why are sharks swimming so close to the shore? Why are there so many shark sightings? Why are sharks coming into areas where they are in peril themselves, not only imperiling people that are around the area, but they too are in peril? Why are sharks landing in areas which are really not normal places for them to be located? So these are just some other other little items of the so many items that you could talk about, that one could talk about as pertains to the environment. And we can't say enough about it. We keep on harping on it. It is that urgent. So much more could be said. I won't belabor it today, but the environment is everything and anything. The environment is everything that there is. It's everything profound and fundamental to who we are and to life and to the sanctity of life. Please, please, please think about it. Take a look around. You can be your own scientist with your own eyes. Now on to animals. I was thinking how animals and the trying circumstances and painful circumstances and torturesome circumstances that they endure are not seen on television, are not reported on television, are not examined on television. Rarely, if ever, do you see on a 60 Minutes or any other kind of news item show a subject, a little story, a little encapsulated story about animals in research, or for that matter, people that protest about animals in research. Think of all the research going on and all the organizations dedicated to preserving animals and to stopping research on animals, and think of how there's no coverage of one or both sides of this matter, or the fact that millions of animals around the world are confined in laboratories where experiments are done on them as living beings, and where millions suffer fates and kinds of circumstances that any horror story couldn't make our skin cringe enough to hear about as compared with what animals are undergoing. And that is a silent concentration camp of beings that can feel and would quickly run away and never be there if they could at all help it, no matter how well they are reportedly cared for. No one would volunteer to have his or her brain smashed in to study trauma to the brain, or have an infection given to them in order to study how a disease pans out as it progresses, even with the best of care. And there we have all these millions of animals incarcerated in locked laboratories. No one talks about it. You don't hear about it. You don't see it in the newspaper. So many thousands and millions of people outraged about it, upset about it, sick about it around the world. You don't see what they're doing, trying to get consciousness of this. And that's the interesting silent concentration camp disease, underground disease that exists right as we exist at every moment of our lives. So please remember, out of sight, out of mind, just like prisoners in prison. We're not in the prisons. If we're not in the prisons and we've not had that experience of being in there or even seeing it firsthand, it's out of mind, and we just forget about it. And sometimes, and a lot of times, and most of the time, and many of the times, people in prison to some degree have done something as human beings, and that's a long story to that too. But the animals are captured, taken away, babies taken from their mothers, shipped in crates, sold like commodities on the market, and put at the disposal of experimenting human hands, all under locked, guarded conditions where the light of day doesn't shine, no matter how well, supposedly, they are being treated. Now, the New England Anti-Vivisection Society is one of the area organizations that works on behalf of animals, and I wanted to bring to your attention that they recently sent a letter regarding the matter of students, particularly in high school, being required or asked to do vivisection, dissection on animals that have been killed. Vivisection is when animals are alive, and surgeries and live physical interventions are done in their body as they live. That's vivisection. But this is dissection, which is cutting apart and looking into animals for various reasons as a matter of anatomy and biology after they are dead. And I know it used to be the case when I was coming up in high school that one would even kill, for example, a frog in order to dissect it. A grisly matter, a grisly affair. I remember once we dissected a frog, or I stood by as it was dissected, and she was pregnant, and there you opened it and were all the eggs in her belly. Now, this letter from New England Anti-Vivisection Society said, recently, this was written, mysterious buckets began washing up recently on Cape Cod beaches. What they contained was frightening and grisly bullfrog body parts, legs, heads, intestines, as well as pig hearts in formaldehyde. Was this science fiction? Far from it. It was the everyday science waste from Boston high school dissection classes that had ended up on pristine public beaches. These buckets of body parts sent shockwaves through Massachusetts, who for the first time saw the immense cruelty, waste, and pollution caused by the dissection industry. It's time that the public is educated about the reality of dissection and that students are given a right to choose not to dissect. So they're asking that people help them out to fight this campaign that students have a right not to dissect animals. And the person says, as I write you this letter, I am haunted by all the animals who have died for dissection experiments nationwide, by the black and white rabbit who was purchased as a pet only to be slowly suffocated in a plastic bag for a high school dissection class, by the cats whose cadavers were callously and sadistically used as a nativity scene in a high school holiday pageant, and by the millions of frogs, fetal pigs, cats, and other innocent animals who suffer the unspeakable cruelty of biological supply houses that breed and, in a sense, manufacture animals for science with genetic manipulations, breed and virtually manufacture animals in the millions for experiments by humans. I'm also haunted by the caring students whose interest in science has been stunted or killed by forced dissection and by our polluted environment, which must absorb the formaldehyde, chemicals, and pathetic dead bodies from dissection labs. So, in keeping with the spirit of New England Anti-Vivisection Society, I would like to ask you, to call them and join in with helping them on this and other things that they fight for. The telephone number is 617-523-6020. 523-6020, and you can go to their website, which is NewEnglandAntiVivisectionSociety.org. So just the letters, NEAVS, or just go to Google and put in their name. And what you can do that only costs you the price of a postcard or a letter, a stamp, is they have a campaign that people would send in cards to the Boston School Committee or any committee of any area that you may be in, but we're in Boston, and write a note that you do not wish to have students being forced to dissect animals in biology classes. So this would go to the superintendent at 26 Court Street, and the area code is 02108. The superintendent of schools at 26 Court Street, and the area code is 02108 in Boston. You can also go to my website and email me and get information of how to do this. So much for the New England Anti-Vivisection Society trying to help stop forced dissection of animals in high schools. Now, we also have a little something to talk about regarding animals and tests that are still being done, to give you an example of the many, many kinds of tests, on how toxic things are to other animals that don't have the misfortune of being in the laboratory, to plants, to humans. And one of these tests is a skin corrosion test where rabbits are locked into full body restraints and a test chemical is applied to the shaved skin on their back. A chemical is considered to be corrosive if it eats through the skin, burning away several layers of tissue. No painkillers or anesthetics are provided for this or for any of the other tests that I'm going to tell you about. These are tests sanctioned by the EPA for toxicity testing. And the irony of it is, which I really don't care about either, is that non-animal tests exist that can do the same thing as causing corrosion or seeing if corrosion is caused to animal skin. And I wouldn't care if there were such alternatives or not. I'm just absolutely appalled, mortified, and reject that an animal would have its skin shaved and have chemicals applied to see if it corrodes the skin. Another is skin irritation. This one's nearly identical to corrosion, except that experimenters try to find out if the skin damage is reversible, unlike corrosion, which is irreversible. And another is skin absorption, where the back of rats are shaved and the chemical is smeared on it for up to 24 hours, after which the skin is washed and the animals are housed in metabolism cages to permit the collection of their urine and feces for analysis. Animals are later killed and their skin and blood are analyzed. And you better believe that they have no way to lick off the chemical, scratch the chemical, or do anything about the chemical as it is being absorbed into their skin. And this article that I'm reading from notes that of all the money spent testing animals, some of them for toxins like mercury, arsenic, and lead, how much better it would be to go and clean up the sites where these chemicals can get into water systems and human systems than it is to test chemicals that are mixed into water on animals, or chemicals that are put onto animal skin to see how corrosive, how toxic they are. How much better it would be to eliminate these chemicals and to clean up environments where it's a matter of things that are polluting the environment. So please remember the animals. They did you no harm. They uplift us. They belong here as much as anybody. We are stewards of the earth if you go by a biblical point of view, and to be stewards of the earth is to preserve the creatures that live in it. And I've been listening sometimes to people talking about eco-terrorists who are doing acts of destruction against what they see as too much ecological damage. Oh, we have a telephone call.
This program is brought to you by the psychological services of Dr. Nancy Mroczek.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. It's very good to have you on live again, and I regrettably, I have to talk about 911 today and that terrible tragedy. And the Environmental Protection Agency, it came out now that they were pressured by the Bush administration to say that the air quality right after that terrible disaster was okay for people to breathe. And those heroic people who put their lives on the line in good faith to help their fellow human beings or animals or anybody that was in distress, a natural reaction out of their goodness, they are now suffering and paying the price for that. There was no kind of protection offered. I mean, the Environmental Protection Agency, which their only integrity is that they are supposed to be the safeguards of this, they squandered that and they lied and said the air was okay. The priorities are just topsy-turvy in terms of, again, what you're talking about, a quality of life. And I just applaud you being on the front lines of this necessary struggle.
Well, I'm not on much of a front line. Thank you for your kind words, but I get to sit here and talk. There are people actually working at this night and day, devoting their lives to it, and that's like Greenpeace people, because they feel it. They feel it so badly they can't do anything but, or some animal activists. They feel it so badly that they can't do anything else but be that way. And I wanted to respond to your point about the air quality in New York on 9/11. Anybody that would say that air quality was okay to breathe, to put it bluntly, is missing a few screws. No man, woman, or child could give an imprimatur to that air quality. That was purely deadly air. And unfortunately, people couldn't escape it. They had to breathe it. And if you lived in New York, far and wide, up the road in the 90s, 100s, you were still breathing it, not as badly as, and you breathed it for days and days and days. Carcinogens, computers and modern-day synthetics melted going into the body.
And the EPA then put out a statement saying that the air was okay. What we knew, we sensed that we were getting sick, folks breathing in all that, and they said nope. We put our good name and integrity on the line as the Environmental Protection Agency. We put our stamp of approval on it. It's all right.
Yeah, and that's just really not possible. I saw Rudy Giuliani talking about that today, and he said that there were about 7 or 8 reports altogether, including the EPA's, all of which concluded virtually the same, that the air was safe to breathe. This is unabashed, straightforward, a misrepresentation.
Yes, ma'am, and that does just so much harm in terms of just less and less trust upon people in terms of believing people in authority. I mean, it's just another terrible step backwards.
You know, I said before that the animals don't get any coverage on television or on the radio, for that matter. And there's so much research going on using animals and so much activity against it. But there's not much coverage on the environment. I failed to bring that out. There's no coverage on the battles about logging and mining and air quality. A blurb goes by that a rule is reversed or that Sierra Club does or doesn't like it, and that's it. There's really no coverage of these big battles going on, so that the broad awareness of people not directly involved is very small.
And that's right, and because the people that are in positions of power and that have the power right now, they feel that there is money to be made in terms of keeping up these policies, but in the end, it's going to come back to haunt them and their children too. And yet, where they're talking about, for example, deficit spending, and they don't care about that, they're just so unenlightened right now, seemingly, that they're just not even thinking about the quality of the air that their children are going to have to breathe or that they're going to have to breathe.
You know, you bring up a good point. An elderly person was asking me one day, don't these people have to breathe the same air and swim in the same ocean? Even if you have a fine house in Malibu, don't you still have to have oil slicks and sharks swimming where they don't belong and dead fish and mercury in the water and stenches of pollution that don't belong there?
And speaking of fishing, the oceans, of course, like Cape Cod, of course, got that name because they were just codfish all over the place, and you can't hardly find a codfish, never mind a healthy big codfish like the type that it was named after today in the ocean. And that's another huge example of what is still going on unchecked, the rape of the oceans.
Exactly.
And then the terrible chemicals that are being put into them, all of that mercury. Once again, that was not how it was during the days of pristine oceans. Yeah.
And the lobsters are smaller. They keep measuring smaller year by year.
And those farms that they talk about that are supposedly the answer to it, where they breeding salmon and these other fish, they are not genetically viable like the way they're supposed to be. When they release them in the wild, a lot of them they don't really do well, and they're not really the same species. They're not healthy, and the same as like the ones that are just naturally out there in the oceans.
Well, I eat mussels, and I forgot the fact that when I do eat them, they're cultivated. They're really tiny. They're getting tinier all the time, and they kind of have a so-so taste. And one day I had some that were fresh from the ocean, and I forgot what a real mussel tasted like. I said, oh, I forgot all about this.
Yes. And again, that situation is just, I wonder, I mean, it would take probably generations now for the oceans to be restored anywhere near the way our ancestors from maybe a generation or two back even remembered it, because they've just been so altered now. I mean, there are so many species now that are just about on the verge of extinction.
Yeah, you hate to harp on these things, as I'm always repeating, but they're so urgent. They're all around you. Anywhere you turn, you can find it just coming on so strongly that you can't do anything else but blow your horn. Help, help, we're in real trouble, unfortunately.
Yeah, and when we talk about the mainstream parties, other than, of course, the Green Party really tries to address these issues, but when we talk about, for example, Democrats and Republicans, they're being funded by these same companies, the Monsantos and all these huge companies, either way, and they are doing their bidding. They are the ones that are being represented. And the only time that we hear once again about the feelings of animals and about what you're talking about is if somebody goes out and creates a media event and then they talk about they call it a terrorist act, and again the Patriot Act has been put in there, and a lot of folks can get caught up in that.
Yes, and remember, Al Gore was such an expert on the environment, but when it came time for him to run for president, he started to mute his language on that, and he never did run on that platform because he needed those corporate donations.
That's right. That's right.
Which brings us back to the whole matter of what's being discussed now, which is highly still way from satisfactory, of how or if at all campaigns should be contributed to on a private basis. So one thing leads to another, and it's all connected.
Oh yes, just like life is. That's for sure.
And corporations rule.
Yes.
That we know. Yeah. Corporations rule. When we talk anything, government, countries, we're talking corporations.
Mm-hmm. And so many of the products, of course, that we have in the supermarkets now. I mean, they're just loaded with these preservatives and some of these fats and synthetics and genetically altered. Well, for example, heirloom tomatoes. With all the work that's been done on tomatoes, the ones that everybody concedes are the really delicious ones and great ones, not just made for shelf life, but the ones before 1940, before they started mutating them, what they call heirloom tomatoes. That's it, heirloom tomatoes. And some of the newer ones, they can't even, Europe and other parts of the world do not want them imported from the United States. That's a whole other area. For example, with the World Bank, now, once again with that, Africa and Europe doesn't want just anything that the United States will just dump over there, and the United States it doesn't consider them like an equal partner. They have like a dual standard. And Europe doesn't want a lot of the foods that are allowed in this country. In Europe, people with similar degrees say, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want these genetically altered foods in our food chain.
Yeah, and there's 2 points about the tomatoes. Today's tomatoes are ruined, as is broccoli on its way and many other vegetables. You have tough skins. You have increasingly hard pulpous cores that are not the fleshy fruit of a tomato. You have those fake green things coming out. You have enhanced smell at the surface, but not through the taste. All genetically altered. You have many that you could use as I always call them ping pong balls, but they wouldn't pong because once you throw them, they're like lead. And look at them, funny colors, half yellow, wrong shapes, queer shapes. They're ruined. The flavor of a garden fresh tomato of 50, 40 years ago has been ruined. There aren't any good tomatoes. The seeds are all polluted, cross-bred by mistake, on purpose. And as far as Europe accepting genetically modified, this is a moral outrage, philosophically a very moral outrage, that Europe would say, we don't want products that contain genetically modified parts to them or totality to them. And why would they not have a right to say, we don't want those kinds of foods? And now it's gone to the World Court, and the World Court ruled that they can refuse these products if they can prove that they do some harm to eat them. And of course it's such a complicated and long-term matter as to what these products can and will do to people that you cannot in the moment show, look, 10,000 people died because they took a bite of these now bastardized tomatoes. And that's where we stand. And philosophically, that is morally beyond the pale, that countries would not have a right to say, we don't want certain kinds of manipulations and changes to the food we want to choose to import.
And the World Bank puts a lot of pressure on countries all over the world to accept these products. That's something that we hear very little about in terms of the headlines that the news has, as the major news outlets present the world from their subjective viewpoint.
And if capitalism really works, then why doesn't food production industry work on growing the kinds of foods that people are willing to import? And even if they must do their dastardly deeds, which is totally immoral, a whole other story of genetic manipulation and engineering, why don't they provide the genetically unmodified, pure, if you will, or naturally hybridized produce and foods? Why don't they work on that to give it to the countries if it's a matter of supply and demand? If this is what's being demanded, why isn't it being supplied? And isn't this a manipulation in the so-called free markets where they are coercing people? They are forcing nature into product manipulations and patents on God-given food, and coercing people to take this. No such thing as supply and demand.
Yes, and probably part of the answer to what you're saying could be that we're still dealing with situations like, for example, the Nestle company trying to force baby formula on people in places where there's a lack of clean drinking water. That is in terms of problems in the world, that comes back to haunt you and me, because if there's a lack of clean drinking water in the world, we talk that there are so many studies out about, for example, how these viruses mutating and so forth, and this comes back sooner or later. It comes back to haunt our immediate loved ones, our immediate family, our uncles, sons, mothers, and daughters, and there's just such a lack of foresight. It seems as if folks like ourselves are just talking to ourselves, because the people in positions of power, they'll just get these very well-reasoned studies from people with PhDs like yourself, and they'll just put it aside. That's all. They'll try to ignore it, or just try to keep this information from getting out. It's very sad.
Well, I thank you very much for calling in, and as usual, you've made some very poignant points. I can see you keep up with it. The things that we're focused on really have nothing to do with our physical welfare, to say the least of our psychological welfare, if only we could see it, but that's the way it is. We have a beautiful world, and it's sad to see it go down this way, and whatever does happen to us as humans, unfortunately, is going to be what we deserve for being so ignorant, I guess.
Well, I do agree with what you're saying, and myself, thank you, for that comment. I am an expert on my own opinion, But I do care, and speaking of caring, with all of these problems that we are facing, I really do believe that life is worth living. It takes a lot of love, such as what I hear you saying right now, to really care about these things. Because it's much easier to just cop out, throw up our hands, and just give up and say, what the heck, or something stronger, as opposed to, really, this is a form of love, to really care about the planet and the animals, the sentient creatures, the people, and the life on this planet, and to offer what I think is a positive response to it.
Now, you say life is worth living. You hit a nerve with me. Why is life worth living to you, sir?
Because while there's life, there is hope. And I believe that a negative situation should always, not some of the time, but most of the time, but we should always try to address a negative situation in a positive manner. I can't tell you what that is. That's where your own intuition comes in terms of thinking about this, pondering this, and deciding what would be righteous indignation, which I think is what you display. You're angry, and that's it, but not bitter. There's different types of anger.
I am
bitter,
angry.
And not just words.
Yes, I am angry.
Yes. But it's a righteous indignation. It's not what I would call hateful anger or bitterness. Not just because I say so, but if somebody was even examined, if these same scientists who put their electrodes in rats' brains, if they did this with you, and of course they are doing this. They're doing these experiments all the time, and where people can be human guinea pigs. But they would say they know themselves that there's a difference between that bitter type in terms of the way it registers in an electrosynograph, and the righteous loving type. It's very different to tell a child, no, take your hand out of that stove, as opposed to I hate you. There's nothing good comes out of that type of anger. But the type of indignation and energy that you're putting in here, I think that comes out of love. What you're saying here is it's caring. You're venting. You're doing a lot of venting here, but you're not just spinning your wheels. I don't believe so, because that's going out there. We never know exactly where your message is being heard. On the other hand, there aren't enough people, it seems, hearing it, and it can be so discouraging, especially like right after your program. Then you'll hear other things happening, other legislation from the people who right now are in power, going even further and saying, we can relax the standards even more, and all this, but something has got to give. And like I say, while there is life, there is hope. I really believe that with all my heart.
Well, you mentioned people in power, and I always think, too, that whoever is in power, the way we are as humans, would likely be compromised. I mean, you don't get to be in big power, no matter how good a person you might be and how good your values might be, unless you've made a lot of compromises to many different factions. Every step you take in gaining power, unless you take it like Saddam Hussein, and even he had to yield, I'm sure. But especially in a system where you are, so to speak, elected into power, and I'll say something right here that will aggravate many people who don't agree with this, but we recently had someone selected into power.
Yes.
But and we can never change that watershed. It's not like we're bringing up sour grapes, but it's an historical event that the watershed nature of which will forever remain in our history. But whenever you climb your way to power, you're going to be giving in, and you're going to be owing, and you're going to be having to balance a lot of interests.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the problem with that, because again, the type of person right now who can become president of the United States, or actually president of any major group, that is who they are representing. They are the mouthpiece of those interests, and of course, the thrill they get out of it is the egocentric aspect of that. Of wow, I'm getting the adulation of the crowd and that sort of thing, and many people, whether they be entertainers or politicians, that the way they get in that position is telling people what they think they want to hear, as opposed to what we really need to hear. And if they can get a big enough group to do that, even in what they call a so-called dictatorship, you mentioned Saddam Hussein. We'd have to ask, only he would know this, but did he have peace of mind? I mean, we understand, we hear, and I believe it, that when he was at the head of that country, or even now, or he would have to move from one place to another place every so many hours. He had doubles or other people that looked like him. I mean, he was living in practically in a paranoid type of a situation. That was what was normal for his lifestyle. But I don't think it was very good for. I don't think it was very good for his blood pressure.
No, it wasn't, but I'm sure if you asked him, would you give all this up for serenity, he would never. It would be like a Hollywood actor living a very crazy life. Let's say a J-Lo. I'm sure the intensity and pressure on her is immense. Or Michael Jackson. Let's get really big. Yet if you were to say, would you like to be somebody else, they would never trade it, so.
Oh, certainly. And we have been endowed with, I believe, we've been endowed with what's called free will. There are some people that want to live in that fast lane. There are some people that want to live fast and go out fast. There are other people who like to smell the roses, so to speak. It seems like you love roses, it seems like, and I do too. And I would like to try to be on this earth for a long time to be able to enjoy those pleasures like the fresh air that's still out there, perhaps when you catch the right breeze in the Cape and so forth. But no, that is their prerogative. They can if that's the way they want to live. That is up to them to decide what they want to do with that.
Well,
and suffer the consequences.
It's just so very sad that when you try to catch a nice breeze at the Cape and you may not be getting it as clean and pure and gorgeous as it was in the past, these things are all sad. There's anger, and it's this sadness. It's this deep, deep sadness. And so it makes you just always think about it, because it's not isolated. Everywhere you turn, the evidence is overwhelming.
Well, even in Antarctica, supposedly the most remote place on Earth, and it's not an opinion. It's well documented that the air is not as clean there. It's sad to say.
Well, and I will say we are going to close here shortly. I will say that back to the power, the idea of power, that right now money controls the process. Money is not speech. Speech is speech. Money is not speech. Speech is speech. There's no equivalency between the two. But now, of course, money controls it, and money should be out of it. But even were we to have pure, which wouldn't be possible, even if we were to have unmoney situation, which would be hard to foresee, people would still be very compromised as they get to power, because people are very different. Everybody's unique and individual, and they have different values, and they want to do different things, and they will be pulling at people along the way, and you never end up being able to carve a path towards what is really good and pure and wholesome and right when you are in a position of power. That's the human condition, except that Mahatma Gandhi did go a long way towards that, although he would probably be the first to acknowledge many of his own frailties.
There's a gentleman, I like to quote him on this because I didn't think it up, although I'm inspired by him as I am by you. He likes to say, he's not here to tell you what to think, but think. It's not illegal yet. And that's a gentleman right here in the Boston-Cambridge area named Brother R.A.
At B.U.R., right? Or what, MBR?
Yes,
MBR.
that's right.
You told me about him, yes. Yes. And that's how I will close the show for this evening. That's a very good thought. That's it. That's it. Just to think. Whatever you want to think, but to be thinking. But I think to ask for that in a computerized world, a highly sexually, hedonistically oriented world in and of itself for no particular reason, a non-relating world, that's a lot to ask for. Maybe we could only ask for people to look around a little bit. It's a lot to ask for. I mean, and with the busy lives we're leading, when are we going to have time to think? You know, we're mostly ignoring we spend a lot of energy ignoring the negative stimuli, the negative symbolisms around us.
And they are there all the time, and marketing groups are always having these focus groups to see just what more we'll accept in the name of selling us something.
Yes. Yes, and that's another good point to end the show, another bad good point to end the show on. Sell, sell, sell. Not everything is up for grabs, and money as a yardstick, even cost-benefit analysis, is a sickening ultimate destination for a people to be embarked on. So thank you very much for calling, sir, and hope to hear from you again.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night now.
And same to all of you out there this evening. I hope you listened from your angry, sad, and hopefully not bitter, though I'm not sure about that, correspondent here, trying to get through, just to have you think about these things, or because it's by thinking that we get beautiful and less depressed and get to the meat of the matter. Think of the animals, think of the environment, and no bombs, and no napalms, and no mass destructions, and AK-47s, and living by violence and destruction and the power of brutality. Let's go towards humanity. Thank you to the crew tonight, Henry Lopez, Lita Booth, Ryan Nadeau. Good evening.
This program is brought to you by the psychological services of Dr. Nancy Mroczek.